Hello, DawgNation. Happy Thanksgiving. Trust you are enjoying your Black Friday afternoon. Thanks for being a part of it with us here on Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. I'm Brandon Adams. In just a moment, the entire DawgNation team, including Connor Riley, sending in his picks video, pre-recorded here this week, will share our thoughts on all the big games in the upcoming weekend, including the big Georgia Tech game taking place tonight. All of this from a point spread perspective. And then at that point, Dari, Payrow, our good friend from R.S. Andrews, will be asked if he wants to join the consensus, or as we say around here, go with the flow and get involved with what we're doing, or if he has his different thoughts on the upcoming games of the weekend. It's the finale of the regular season. It is known as Rivalry Week, and we are excited about all of that. Before we give you this week's picks, let's also go back and look about kind of how it's been going here in recent weeks. For me, kind of right back to sort of where I've been a little bit lately, having a hard time getting off the 500 mark, 3-3 last week, but still 12 games over 500 on the season, and I reckon we'll take that after the long grind that it has been. Speaking of 500, that's what Jeff Sintel sees himself as on the year here, 36-36, 2-4 last week. Connor Riley also 2-4. That puts him at 35-37 on the year. Kaylee Manziel 3-3 last week. She's at 34-38 on the year. Mike Griffith at 3-3 at 31-41 on the year. And Dari Payrow 1-5 at 30-42. The truth is, over the course of the last few years, this show has been really good at picking winners. Obviously, for the board overall, perhaps not our best year, with the exception of myself. But other than that, not our best year necessarily. But that means we're about to get hot when it matters most, and that's what's perhaps on the way here today. Of course, all of this brought to you by R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised, and that means as we're enjoying some, not necessarily enjoying, but maybe enduring is a better word, enduring some very cold weather here right now. If you want to get your heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs, our friends at R.S. Andrews will help you do all of that and get some new life out of that old unit. Somebody may have told you need to replace it. Eventually, you might have to. But our friends at R.S. Andrews can get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs and get you enjoying a nice, toasty, warm, comfortable home all winter long, getting some new life out of that old heating unit. Now, speaking of breathing new life into old things, perhaps that's what's going to happen here with our first game. We travel to Athens, game slated to take place tonight, as the Georgia Bulldogs host Georgia Tech in a renewal of the rivalry known as clean old-fashioned hate. Georgia hasn't lost in this series since 2016, but in 2 years of Jeff Collins as the Tech head coach, it would certainly appear that the Jackets are kind of nipping at the heels of the Georgia Bulldogs a little bit, at least after last year's game in Atlanta, which was decided by single digits. But obviously Georgia's still seeing itself in the position of the favorite here, 19.5 points, the number we're going with. And as has been the case in every game these two teams have played since the 2017 season, Georgia takes on the Yellow Jackets, also knowing that its future is secure for the following week in the SEC Championship. Is that potential look-ahead spot trouble for Georgia against the Yellow Jackets on Saturday? Once again, in Athens, Sanford Stadium, the number is 19.5. Mike Griffith, as always, you'll start us off.
Yes, a tough one, Brandon, because I think Kirby's going to have the guys stoked up, and I think Georgia's the better team. But 19.5 feels like a lot of points for this rivalry when I reflect on last year. Last year the game was in Atlanta. I'm going to take Georgia Tech in the points in this one just because I do think it's going to be a slobber knocker physical game.
So, Mike, on the side of Georgia Tech there, plus the 19.5. Jeff Sintel, what about you?
Yeah, I think this one is intriguing. I mean, Brent Key is going to pull into Athens, and he's going to try and ride his rushing attack into Athens and bludgeon the Bulldogs. But I think the Dogs, they're going to take those keys like they found Georgia Tech without the proper license. They're going to pull over that Georgia Tech team. Maybe I've got recency bias of watching Tech against North Carolina State, excuse me. But I also see how Tech is way down in those SP rankings, number 61 nationally. I think the Dogs will deliver a beatdown of Georgia Tech this weekend in Athens. Lay those points. Give me those Dogs.
So you see a little bit of a differing of opinions between Mike and Jeff. As I mentioned before, Connor Riley, our other DawgNation colleague, is enjoying a little bit of Thanksgiving time here prior to game day. So he was kind enough to send his picks via pre-record here. Let's find out what Connor Riley thinks about clean old-fashioned hate.
It seems too easy. We've seen Georgia not come out great a lot this year. We've seen teams like Kentucky find a way to shorten the game. Auburn did something similar there. We know Georgia Tech's going to want to run the football, and specifically with Haynes King in that game. Yeah, this game is still at 19.5 points. That feels like a lot. I feel like everyone knows this is going to be a close game, and I'm going to take the cheese. I'm going to take Georgia Tech to cover those 19.5 points. Don't think that they're going to win the game, but I think because of the way that they're going to be able to play, and because of, quite frankly, the way Georgia has struggled to defend running quarterbacks all year, they're going to find a way to keep this within the number.
So interesting here to see a little bit of love on the underdog here thus far. Yellow Jackets getting some steam, plus 19.5. Kaylee Manziel, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to have to hit the brakes on this spread. I think that Georgia Tech is looking to go pedal to the metal on this game. They want it so bad. It's not going to be enough, but 19.5 is a lot of points. And as much as Georgia Tech runs the ball, it's going to run up a lot of the clock. So I like this to be maybe like a 16, 17-point game, but not 19.5. Give me the Jackets.
So let me walk through my thoughts here on this for a moment. Obviously, if you want to go back to when Georgia really kind of got humming under Kirby Smart, blowout win, and what was kind of thought to be the kind of the finale of the revenge tour in 2017. From that game forward, 17, 18, 19, and then the next game that took place in 2021, Georgia covered 4 straight against Georgia Tech. Last 2 years in the Brent Key era, technically speaking, Georgia's failed to cover the spread in both those games, despite the fact that neither one was particularly close. Certainly the 2022 game wasn't really close at all, but it was not a cover for Georgia there that day. And some of that sort of in keeping with what the Brent Key era has been like for Georgia Tech, to give credit here to a rival, something I don't necessarily enjoy doing. When you look at in the Brent Key era thus far for Georgia Tech, going back to when he became interim coach in October of 2022, when they've been facing a situation as an underdog of 17 or more points, they're 5-2 against the spread in those games, and remarkably, they're 3-4 straight up. That the best wins, the biggest performances for Tech in the Key era have all come in games in which they were an underdog of somewhat similar status to what they'll be on Friday night. However, that for me, in a weird way, is sort of an argument for Georgia. I think any chance that Tech might have to sort of sneak in under the cover of darkness and catch Georgia looking ahead to the SEC championship, I simply think the Yellow Jackets have been just kind of too good as an underdog to see that happen here. I also think part of the reason that Georgia played so poorly against UMass last week, if we're being honest, is because it was also beginning its look ahead to Georgia Tech there without perhaps full attention being paid to the Minutemen. One of the themes for me in today's show is going to be favorites in rivalry games that have playoff implications. My guess is the perceived better team is going to be ready for those games, including Georgia here right now. I like Georgia minus 19.5. I don't always take them with the big spread, but in this particular case, something tells me Georgia's going to be ready to go here on this Friday night. So I'll take Georgia minus the 19.5, but perhaps surprisingly, the flow is on Georgia Tech plus the points. Dari, you want to go with the flow and take the Yellow Jackets?
Yeah, I mean, this is all about, who's got the steady hand on that steering wheel to drive the tempo of this game. And I think it's going to kind of be one of those running, slow it down. There may be some big plays. I think the point spread is too much. I'll take those points and the Jackets to cover this game.
So a little bit of love there on Georgia Tech, perhaps keeping it closer. Sometimes that's what rivalry games provide. We'll see if that's the case on Friday night. Still think that Georgia may be the right side here on this. They may coast an easier victory than perhaps some are expecting. We'll step outside of that, and we'll look at another in-state rivalry game. And without hyperbole, I believe I can say this is one of the biggest regular season games I can remember. Long drought for Texas and Texas A&M. They have not played each other in the field since 2011. Texas A&M in the SEC. No fan of the Longhorns joining them in that league. And now they'll get back to the business of playing with both teams vying for a spot in the SEC championship, and both teams also holding on to college football playoff hopes. The Longhorns seem to have more of a straight path there. Number 3 ranked by the committee this past week, although Texas A&M, certainly as the SEC champion, would get that guaranteed bid all the way in, and maybe they might even think with a win against Texas on Saturday evening, they perhaps might be on their way to punching a ticket too, despite the fact they've already lost 3 times. It is a gigantic game in the Lone Star State. Texas in Kyle Field there on Saturday night sees itself as a 5.5-point favorite. Mike Griffith, what do you want to do here at the Aggies getting 5.5 at home in what truly is almost like a game of the century?
Yes, it's a tough one because Texas is the more talented, higher ranked team, and A&M's coming off a pretty difficult loss at Auburn. I'm going to take A&M in the points. I'm not strong enough to say I think they're going to pull the upset, but I do think they'll keep it close enough that 5.5 points could come into play.
So that is Mike looking for a little action there on Saturday night with the Aggies at Kyle Field. Jeff Sintel, what about for you?
Yeah, guys, I tell you what, there is significant juice around that one, as Brandon said. These two teams have not met since 2011. These teams have been waiting to play each other and bludgeon each other longer than we were all waiting to get our first driver's license, or when we first got grounded and mom and dad took away the car and we couldn't drive for a month. I love the Aggies in this game. Love, love, love. I think there is a special teams difference between these two programs. Or offense and defenses, if you look at those SP plus ratings, pretty close. But I think home field advantage, and I think Elko, the way he emphasizes special teams in this program, will mean the difference. I'm not calling for an outright win, but I love getting 5.5 in Kyle Field with the Aggies.
A lot of folks backing Texas A&M here right now. Let's go to the pre-record and find out if our colleague Connor Riley feels the same way.
Kirby Smart has said it all year. It is really hard to go on the road and win in this league. And we saw Texas when they went on the road against Vanderbilt earlier this year. They did not cover the spread in that game. And, well, yes, Texas A&M left it all out there on the field in Auburn, losing in 4 overtimes, finding a way to lose that game. And you can make the argument that both teams tried to find a way to lose that game last week. I'm just going to take the home team here. So giving the Texas A&M Aggies and the points, I don't think that they're going to win this game. But I think they're going to find a way to keep it close, and I think there's backdoor potential here as well. So give me Texas A&M plus the 5.5 points. Don't feel great about it, but I'm just going to take the home team in these SEC games.
3 straight gig'ems here thus far. Connor obviously making the compelling point about the fact that we've seen home teams play pretty well in this league all season long. But Kaylee, a lot of love right now for Texas A&M. Are you in on that too?
This one's tough. This one's really, really, really tough because two teams with a lot of history, but I feel like they're very different. If Texas A&M is the shiny new Lamborghini, then Texas A&M is that old reliable pickup truck that your parents handed off to you. But sometimes it's the old reliable one that you have to go with. I agree with Connor, and I'm only saying that because he's not here. But it's hard to go play on the road at SEC. Texas A&M has been waiting on this game. I like them to keep it close, so I'm also going to have to show some love to Texas A&M.
Man, I'm a little bit surprised it's a clean sweep, and I have to say I do not agree with this at all. Now, I'm also wrong plenty, although maybe not quite as much this year as in the past. But either way, I cannot get in on Texas A&M here for a couple of reasons. Let me start with this. I think it's easy to get tripped up with the fact that we would say, well, Texas is overrated because they've played no one. But just because you're unproven doesn't mean you're not good. I still think Texas is a good team. I just think it's played a schedule undeserving of the ranking it currently has, if you understand how I'm kind of splitting the difference there on that and trying to thread that needle. I still think this is a pretty good team. And there are 2 results, one for each team, that really stands out to me here. You know, last September, Texas went into Bryant-Denny Stadium as an underdog that day, as hostile an environment as you can find yourself in, and they won that game pretty convincingly. And conversely, you know, Texas A&M, just to be honest, for a good number of years now, spanning obviously now 2 different head coaches, they're not great at home. And earlier this year, not as big of an environment, but frankly, as Georgia fans can attest, when Notre Dame comes into your stadium, that's a pretty big environment. And Notre Dame won that game that day by 10 points. So this is a year in which Notre Dame has kind of already fallen flat in a big home game as a favorite on the road the last 2 seasons, and kind of what is a little bit of a playoff era for Texas. They are 3-4 against the spread when favored on the road. I think they probably are the better team than Texas A&M. I'll be rooting like heck for Texas A&M. I'd love nothing more than to be wrong about this just because I don't like Texas. But I'm also not going to just, light my money on fire here either. I think Texas minus the 5.5 is the right play. It's been tough playing on the road, but the Aggies have given away a bunch of home games in the past. I sort of trust Texas in this spot. So I'll be the lone guy on Texas minus the 5.5. And Dari, I'll ask you if you want to go with the flow with everybody else and take Texas A&M.
I mean, Texas has dominated this series. It's been paused since 2011, but they've absolutely owned the Aggies. And usually, if you look at the wins that they played against them in that time, they've usually by double digits. I mean, there's only a handful that are close. And I just kind of look at this as like when you go on a road trip with the car and it's a big trip, you want to make sure you get the maintenance done, the oil changed, the filter changed, check the tire pressures, the washer fluids. I think Texas is ready for that. They've done that. And I think A&M, with how they've lost this past week, I think they're distracted, and I don't think they're going to go through all the proper steps with their car on the proper maintenance, and that's going to catch up to them in this game. I think Texas is going to wax them and beat them by double digits.
So, Dari, on the side of Texas, also a lot of automotive-themed jokes and puns and analogies here on today's show, which is kind of funny to listen to there. But Dari kind of joining me on the side of Texas. I do think it's an awesome game, and I'm looking forward on Saturday to being home, eating some leftovers, and watching that. Another SEC rivalry that also has playoff implications, and it's an in-state one to boot, as Tennessee goes to Nashville against the Vanderbilt Commodores, and all of a sudden that is not quite such an easy path anymore. Of course, Tennessee in the college football playoff field right now, one of the bigger beneficiaries of the losses by Ole Miss and Alabama last week. The Vols coming in ranked 8th, seeded 9th in the most recent college football playoff top 25 that came out on Tuesday night. On the other side, Vanderbilt 6-5 on the season. They've already beaten Alabama and played Texas close at home here this year. They are, however, in this spot getting 10.5 with Tennessee coming to call. So, Mike Griffith, we come back to you in Nashville. Vanderbilt playing host to the Vols, 10.5-point underdogs for their trouble. What do you want to do with this one?
Another rivalry game. I think the fact that it's in Nashville, the Commodores, obviously a dangerous team there, played Texas within 3, beat Alabama. Give me Commodores and 10.5 points.
So, Mike, on the side of the underdog here right now. Jeff Sintel, what about for you?
Interesting. Will the Volunteers' 12-team playoff hopes break down on the side of the road in Nashville? Or will, Vanderbilt repossess the bragging rights for the state of Tennessee with a win? You look at Vandy, guys, be very careful here. They've only lost one time this entire season by more than this 10.5-point spread. That was to South Carolina. They've played Texas tight. They played LSU tight. They beat Alabama. Of course, they did lose to Georgia State. I'm just feeling, I guess, kind of what Kirby said, what Connor Riley has echoed already, but you go on the road, it's pretty tough. And if you're in go with the flow and you're in the go with the flow lane and you're like, I'm getting 10.5 for a home team, take it. Give me the Commodores.
We've never had this many underdogs be taken by the majority of our panel here about halfway through the show. Interesting stuff. How about Connor Riley on his pre-record? Is he also on the underdog here?
Feels like we're not really paying attention to what seems to happen every week now. Last week there were a lot of people riding high on Alabama saying, they'll go in, they'll beat Oklahoma because I think Oklahoma's a limited team. Or, Ole Miss, they'll be able to go down to Gainesville and handle their business. And I know Nick Saban has said that Vanderbilt is not like a lot of other stadiums out there, but I feel like people are giving Tennessee the same sort of pass that they were giving Ole Miss and they were giving Alabama right into the college football playoff. And I think these doors, who found a way to cover last week against Vanderbilt, against LSU on the road, I think they're going to find a way to keep this game close. This is a pesky team. It's a team that's going to make it difficult for Tennessee. So I like Vanderbilt plus the points here in this situation. Again, I think Tennessee wins this game, but I think it is closer than the double-digit margin.
I mean, we are just clean sweeping on the underdog here right now. Kaylee, what about for you? Do you also like the Doors plus 10.5?
Isn't it so funny seeing Connor make his own picks? Because if Connor was here right now, he would have swerved off the road from Mike and Jeff and taken Tennessee. But now we actually get to see that Connor's been backseat driving the entire time that we've been doing Go With The Flow. But look, I'm in agreement with the rest of the panel. I think that Vanderbilt probably saw what happened last week between Florida and Ole Miss and being in that disruptor role and seeing how much praise they got. I mean, you had Tennessee fans doing the Gator chomp at their game. Like, that's just the world that we live in now. Vanderbilt's played really, really good at home. This is a great opportunity for them to have one more historic win in what's already been a historic season for Vanderbilt. 10.5 points is a lot. I like the underdog.
So it's going to be interesting because I'm obviously on top in the standings, and given how this is going right now, I'm either about to give a bunch of games back in comparison to this competition or extend the lead even further because I am very, very different than most of our panelists here today. I really like Tennessee in this spot here. 10.5 points is obviously the number. When you look at the Josh Heupel era thus far against Vanderbilt, he's only 1-2 against the spread in 3 games played against Vanderbilt, but all 3 of the games for the most part have been blowouts. The one cover was 56-0 going back in 2022, but last year's game was 48-24. The game back in 2021 was 45-21. So it's typically never really been close for Heupel against Vanderbilt. On the other side, Vandy's obviously had a very good season, 6-5 straight up. They're also 8-3 against the spread. But to kind of borrow what Nick Saban has once said before, while Vandy has had a couple of big performances at home, the truth is this is not a regular SEC home venue for Vanderbilt. There will be far more Tennessee fans in Nashville on Saturday than there will be Commodores fans. And I also think that Tennessee is a viable playoff contender. And to give that back in this particular spot, once again, is sort of continuing theme for me. I think a lot of these favorites are going to be ready for this. I think a lot of these favorites are going to be looking to protect their status, including Tennessee. I don't think there's any chance that Tennessee gets caught looking because this is their game for the playoff. They need it, and when you need it that bad, you have a tendency to get it. So I don't mind being by myself on this. I like Tennessee minus the 10.5 in Nashville on Saturday. But, Dari, I come right back to you. Same situation as our last game. Me on the side of the favorite, everybody else on the side of the underdog. You want to go with the flow and take the Commodores plus the points.
I think I'm more in your boat on this. Vandy's been great. They've had some great wins this year. They're a great team this year. It's almost like this is a race between like that minivan Odyssey, which is Vandy, and you're going up against a Corvette, which is Tennessee. I think Heupel's going to pour it on. I'm in agreement with you. I think he's going to show out in this. I think he knows he wants to cement himself without any doubt, and they're going to win this by double digits easily.
Yeah, so Dari kind of joins me and makes a very emphatic case, makes me actually feel even better about my own pick when he says that. Once again, SEC game we'll turn our attention to next. In-state rivalry, playoff implications, perhaps, at least for one of these teams, if it maybe gets a little bit of a help. Alabama coming off a ugly loss at Oklahoma last week where the Crimson Tide failed to score a touchdown, comes back to Bryant-Denny Stadium, taking on an Auburn team that all of a sudden feels like it's got new life after a thrilling overtime win against Texas A&M last week. And, of course, in the Iron Bowl, we have seen crazy things happen before. And if you want to maybe win a bet with some folks around the Thanksgiving table here this week, how about this cool stat to think about? That Alabama is going to be trying to be the first Crimson Tide team in program history to win a game in Auburn at Bryant-Denny Stadium when Nick Saban was not the coach. Obviously, this series taking place at Legion Field for quite some time, and there was also a period of dominance for Senator Tommy Tuberville when he was the coach at Auburn. So Alabama trying to get its first win at Bryant-Denny Stadium with someone other than Saban as the coach on Saturday. Perhaps a lot of folks not aware of that. But the number here is 11.5. Mike Griffith, I come to you. Bama favored at home, reeling after a bad loss. What do you want to do with this spread?
I think home field makes the difference. Give me the Tide, lay the points, Brandon.
So Mike on the side of Alabama. Jeff Sintel, how about you?
Interesting, because you got Alabama, maybe the Porsche program of the SEC for so many years, and last week they needed to call AAA to get out of Oklahoma. I think for me, there's just too big of a gap here. I'd look for the Tide to maybe feed the ball, not to Jalen Milroe, but the young man who just is probably now legally getting his driver's license. That's the fantastic receiver, Ryan Williams, and the other receivers. That's why I think the Tide are going to cover this game late in Bryant-Denny.
So now all of a sudden the favorite's starting to show a little life here on the program. Mike and Jeff both on the side of the Tide, bouncing back after last week against Oklahoma. Connor Riley, how about you?
Alabama got absolutely trucked this past week, and there is a part of me that wonders, what do they look like coming out of the gates here? Really physical game last week in Oklahoma. I know Jalen Milroe didn't throw the ball that well, but he really got beat up as a runner, and I wonder if that sort of carries over into this week's game. Auburn, coming off that big win over Texas A&M, did they play as great as they deserve to win that game? I don't think so, but they got some nice weapons on the offensive side of the ball. Cam Coleman has really emerged in these recent weeks. Jarquez Hunter is probably playing better than any running back in the SEC. But having said all that, this game usually isn't all that close when it's played in Tuscaloosa, and I'm going to ride with the history here, and so I'm going to take Alabama to cover the 11.5-point spread and get a win in the Iron Bowl.
All of a sudden now the underdog can't buy any love anywhere. Everybody on the side of Alabama. It's been a lot of unanimity with our picks here thus far. Kaylee Manziel, I come to you. Bama favored 11.5 at home.
I want to hit the brakes so bad. I do. I really, 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 really do. But my pick is going to be based off some comments that were made this week by Auburn players, which is exactly why you don't let your freshmen speak to the media because, well, quite frankly, they're idiots. And the comments that were made about the 17-year-old Ryan Williams were really personal. I think every person in that locker room has heard them about how he's not anything, and I think that Alabama uses that to their advantage. I think Ryan Williams has an absolute legacy game, and Alabama bounces back. I cannot believe there's just so much agreement on the panel, but I'm going to take Bama too.
Okay, so in this particular case, I am also going to join the fray here on this. Let me give you one quick, just sort of interesting aside. Obviously for the last however many years we can remember, Alabama's been one of college football's best teams. Auburn's kind of been sort of near the bottom of the SEC in many of these years. But the truth is, in this rivalry, it's actually been far closer than I think the casual, sort of only half-interested observer is probably aware of. That Alabama's only beaten Auburn by more than a field goal once in the last year. I should say once in the last 3 years, just twice in the last 5 years. Obviously, Auburn got head-to-head wins straight up in 2019, 2017, and as far back as 2013. So Auburn's had more success against Alabama than many of the other teams it plays, certainly including Georgia. But in this particular spot, listen, Alabama is still, I believe, got a lot to play for. I do think whether people want this to be true or not, they could still make the college football playoff. I also think fresh off one of the worst games in Alabama history going back to obviously prior to Nick Saban's hiring, that if they were to follow that up with another scuffling performance against Auburn, it could really get pretty bad for Kalen DeBoer. Not getting fired necessarily, but quality of life essentially ruined and honeymoon totally over as the replacement for Nick Saban. I think DeBoer probably knows that. There's something to gain by win. There's some pain to be avoided by loss. Once again, it's an example of what I've been saying a lot. A favorite that I think is motivated, focused, and ready for the rivalry game that it's about to play. So I do like here Alabama minus the 11.5. I think they're ready for Auburn for all the reasons I just mentioned. And Dari, maybe for the first time in a little bit of while here, we get to say that is a clean sweep. Do you want to go with the flow and join us all in taking Alabama minus the points?
All right, so I'm kind of with you on this with, Kalen DeBoer. If he loses this, it's going to get weird in Tuscaloosa. They're going to repo that company car. It's going to get ugly. And I'm liking War Eagle and Auburn to continue some momentum in this game. And I think this is going to be one of those weird Alabama-Auburn games where it's tight. I think they're going to cover the number. Alabama's probably going to get the win. But I would love for this to get really weird in Tuscaloosa.
So Dari sees an opportunity there for the underdog, not just to keep it close, but perhaps entertain us all. We've seen some thrilling Iron Bowls, and oftentimes when you least expect them, perhaps Saturday, another example of that. I'll also remind you that if you'll check out the Friday edition of DawgNation Daily and our R.S. Andrews Cool Down at the conclusion of the show, we're going to have our official pick on another great game in rivalry weekend. This is an awesome one, I think. South Carolina and Clemson, both these teams holding on to perhaps faint playoff hopes. Also, in the case of South Carolina, playing like one of the better teams in the country over the course of the last month plus. We'll give you our official thought on that big battle from the Palmetto State. That's coming up as a part of the R.S. Andrews Cool Down on the Friday edition of DawgNation Daily. We'll also give you our best bets for rivalry weekend here on that, too. And, of course, all of this brought to you by friends at R.S. Andrews. Find them online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. Think about that plumbing here for a moment and those plumbing emergencies. If a water heater, for instance, goes out, you don't want to have your Thanksgiving weekend, your rivalry weekend ruined by cold showers and all the complaining that happens in the house when the showers are cold. go ahead and get that thing replaced. In many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. So find them online at rsandrews.com for a lot more on that. We will step outside the SEC for our final rivalry game for this show, and it's not quite an intrastate rivalry, although they do battle over, as they call it, the Toledo split up there in the top part of the state of Ohio, as the Michigan Wolverines travel to Columbus, as the Ohio State Buckeyes, fresh off a win last week, top 10 showdown against Paper Tiger, Indiana. Michigan perhaps more interested in the recruiting side of things right now than the stuff on the field. It's been a lost season and, frankly, a disaster for brand-new first-year head coach Jerome Moore. But obviously, through the dollars of Barstool founder Dave Portnoy and billionaire Larry Ellison, all of a sudden there was an 8-figure sum of money put together to bring in Bryce Underwood as they flipped the quarterback position from LSU to the Wolverines. So the future could be bright for Michigan, whether or not the present tense is exactly what they want it to be or not. Buckeyes favored by 20.5, seeking their first win against Michigan since 2019. So, Mike Griffith, we come to you. Ohio State hosting Michigan. What do you want to do with this?
Real bad Michigan team, good Ohio State team. Give me the Buckeyes, lay the point.
Good team, bad team. Mike makes it sound simple. What do you think, Jeff?
Brandon and panel, this makes me think of those classic Fast and the Furious movies. You know when Dominic Toretto glides up to the street light and he's got a race. He gets to a tight spot and then he flicks that button and turns the NOS on, the nitrous oxide. We could call that not just NOS, but NIL. That's the power underneath the hood of the Ohio State engine. There's going to be a part in this game where Ryan Day flicks on the NOS. Michigan just can't keep up. This one could get ugly. That team up north is going to feel the wrath of a couple of recent beatdowns and a lot of trash talking. Give me Ohio State in a big, big way here. They can't drive 55 against the Michigan Wolverines defense this year.
So a lot of love for Ohio State here thus far. Connor Riley also submitted his pick. Let's find out if he thinks the same thing.
Yeah, similar line here between Georgia and Georgia Tech and Michigan and Ohio State. I think the big difference here is that, one, this Michigan offense, even though they scored 50 points a week ago against Northwestern, is just very limited. And I think you saw last week for Ohio State what they're able to do when they really want to take something away from you. You know, Indiana effectively had 6 yards of offense aside from their first drive of the game and their last drive of the game. I think that Ohio State wants to go out there and make a statement. They've got 3 years of frustrations to take out on this Michigan team. This game is effectively their season for as well as they have played at times this year, coming off a big win over Indiana, looking good on the road at Penn State. This is a game they knew all year long they were going to have to win, and I think they go out there, and I think they actually do play their best game of the season on Saturday. So even though it's a lot of points, give me the Buckeyes here to cover the 20.5.
Once again, a lot of folks kind of moving in the same direction. A lot of love for the Buckeyes right now. Kaylee, what about you?
I'm going to take a flyer here, and I'll tell you why. I think that Ohio State might be looking at their phones while they're driving right now. They're looking ahead to bigger things, a conference championship, a higher spot in the playoffs. It's still a rivalry game. 20.5 points is a lot. And also some of the key pieces that Ohio State has brought in this year, Caleb Downs, their quarterback, Will Howard, they haven't been here for those Ohio State losses to Michigan. I'm not sure that they understand the stature of this rivalry quite yet. It might be a 19, 20-point game, but I think Ohio State knows they've got a lot of media attention from the big win against Indiana, and they're looking ahead to get their revenge on Oregon. So I'm going to take a flyer, try to maybe pull a Connor here. I'm going to take a flyer on Michigan. So
Kaylee taking Michigan plus the points. Obviously, recent trend sort of supports that. You know, we mentioned been kind of a bad year for the Wolverines. They started the season just 1-6 in their first 7 games against the spread. But as of late, they're on a kind of a 3-1 clip against the number. Probably the most, I guess, important result in all that was the close game you may remember a couple of weeks ago against Indiana. So at least as far as the point spread is concerned, Michigan playing a little bit better football as of late. However, the one, I guess, point of contention I would have with Kaylee's pick, though, is I don't think there's any chance, even for newcomers like Caleb Downs, I don't think there's any chance they look past Michigan because this is a program right now seeking that first win against the Wolverines. As I said, since 2019, these two teams obviously did not play in the pandemic year of 2020. And look, this was a very high-profile roster construction project over the course of the offseason. thought to be more than $20 million in total of NIL spent here, and they'd love to win the national championship. They'd like to be back in the college football playoff, but they have to beat Michigan. If Ohio State doesn't beat Michigan on Saturday, Ryan Day will be fired. And I don't think that's the same thing if they, lose in the playoff or come short of the national championship, but they have to beat Michigan. Michigan's kind of off most of our radars because of the fact they haven't been very good this year, but I believe they're in Columbus. They are as hungry to beat the Wolverines as they ever were. It's kind of a prevailing theme for me. Favorites in these rivalry games right now, I think they're ready for them. I think that Ohio State may be the most ready of them all. It's 20.5. That's a gigantic number. I think they want to win by 40. I think they're going to do everything they can to make this blowout city. Rivalry games aren't always easy to pick. I don't want to make it sound like this was easier than it is, but I do believe this is a game they've got circled every bit as much as anything that could happen for OSU in January. So I like Ohio State minus the 20.5. The flow is on the side of the Buckeyes as well. Dari, you want to go with the flow and take Ohio State?
Yeah, I don't think I could do that. I think Michigan, as bad as they've been this year, you still have this rivalry. They're going to put some fight. They're at home. They're right outside Motor City in Detroit, where the Lions are probably going to put up a big win on Thursday, and they're going to try to carry some of that momentum to score some of those leftover points that the Lions are going to be scoring all over the Bears. I think they're going to score enough to get like a backdoor cover, like one of those old station wagons that's got the back that falls down in the 80s where you sat reversed looking out. I think they're going to do that, and they're going to get a cover late in the fourth quarter. I like Michigan.
Shout out, by the way, to the Charlie Brown Thanksgiving that does feature the rear-facing station wagon in the final scene of the animated special. So shout out there on that. And by the way, speaking of Thanksgiving, hope you're all enjoying your Thanksgiving week here right now. We'll also invite you to check out the R.S. Andrews Cool Down at the conclusion of the Friday edition of DawgNation Daily. It's already aired. By the time you see this, we'll give you our official picks for South Carolina going to Clemson and our best bets for rivalry weekend 2 as the playoff field is almost set to be set. And obviously the conference championship games looming in the next 7 days, too. So happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy your Friday. See you tonight for the game, of course, between Georgia and Georgia Tech, and back here again next week at this same time for Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews.